Before we get started, I've got some exciting news. HelloFresh is now a proud sponsor of Divorce and Beyond. If you've been thinking about cutting back on grocery bills, avoiding food waste, or just getting dinner on the table without stress, this is your moment because right now, HelloFresh is offering one free item in every box for life. That's right, every single box you order includes a free item forever. And just to give you a taste of what that looks like, get it, taste, I got pineapple upside down cakes in my first order. I originally discovered HelloFresh during the pandemic, and I fell in love with learning new recipes and expanding our dinner routine. I let it go for a while because, hey, I live in Chicago with world-class restaurants on every corner, but with today's rising costs, HelloFresh is back on my table, and I'm so glad it is. So if you're ready to save time, money, and dinner, go to divorceandbeyond.com/HelloFresh and sign up today to grab that free item for life. You can also find a link in the show notes or divorceandbeyond.com/HelloFresh. And now let's get into today's episode.
Coming up on today's episode of the Divorce and Beyond podcast.
This is a mortgage payment.
Yes.
I mean, their health insurance for some people could be a mortgage. So we're talking about a very large expense for some families. And to make sure that you know what that is so you can plan for it. I think, at this point in where we are economically, we need to plan to take care of ourselves, to be self-sufficient as possible.
Hello, and welcome to the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host. As a top divorce attorney and family law mediator for 30 years, I know what you need to know to get through your divorce, and most importantly, how to move beyond it to thrive and transition to your new future. My experts and I are here to give you the insider view into the process, so listen in for the wisdom and expert information you need on your journey through divorce and beyond. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Divorce and Beyond. I'm Susan Guthrie, your host, and today we are going to build on a recent episode where I explored what I'm calling the Trump effect on divorce. And it was all about sort of the uncertainty of our financial times and how that was impacting divorces both now and as we go forward. Well, since that episode, which was not that long ago, the ground has only continued to shift. So we now have sweeping legislation like the One Big Beautiful Bill, which is raising financial anxiety and policy uncertainty. So today's divorces are unfolding in a volatile economic landscape, and settlements that once felt stable may now rest on shaky ground. So I've gone a step further, and I am bringing in Leah Hadley, who is an accredited financial counselor, certified divorce financial analyst, and the host of the Intentional Divorce Insights podcast. Leah is joining me today to unpack the real-world impact of these changes, things from healthcare and housing to tax strategy, and even the new Trump accounts for your kids, and all about how thoughtful financial planning can help protect your future, which is more important than ever in the world we find ourselves in. So this episode is going to build on the prior conversation, and it offers critical insights for anyone facing divorce in these uncertain times. So let's get into it. All right, Leah, I'm so happy to have you here with me today because I have to tell you that episode that I did not that long ago on just sort of getting divorced in the new financial world we find ourselves in caused a lot of, comment and outreach from my listeners. And now we've got the whole new One Big Beautiful Bill layered in. So having an expert like you on to go through really where we are today, but how we can plan for the future going through divorce is a gift. So thanks so much for being here.
It is my absolute pleasure, Susan. Thank you for having me.
Well, and this is, as I just said, right? That topic, I've been in the divorce world for 35 years now. So I've seen a lot of things happen in the US economy, or as the tax laws have changed, right? We back during the first Trump administration had the elimination of alimony as a deduction from income, and that was a big stir. That was caused a lot of change, but it was kind of centralized, right? It was all around the issue of support, and certainly that had a lot of flow into other areas when we negotiated divorces, but it was somewhat confined. Yet right now, we're kind of living in the wild, wild west of economic times, because every day it feels like the market's up, the market's down, the tariffs are happening, the tariffs aren't happening, there's this, there's that. And as I said a moment ago, the one big beautiful bill has passed. So I thought maybe we could start there, because that is what most people had questions on. And I'm just wondering, as a financial expert with your breadth of knowledge and working with so many people who are going through divorce now, and as you're planning out for the future, what are the key issues you see under the OBBB?
It's such an important question. And I think it's one that a lot of us are still trying to tease out the answers, quite frankly. I mean, the biggest thing is, Susan, entering 2025, I think all financial professionals were really looking at, okay, the TCJA is set to expire at the end of this year. What is that going to mean for taxes, right? Because those were huge sweeping changes that were made. What was that, like 2017 or those were huge changes that were set to expire, right? A lot of them this year. So a lot of what we saw with this new bill was the extension of what already existed, right? But they also took a closer look at a lot of different elements that I think have really been kind of forgotten over time, right? So if we look at one that's going to be relevant for all of the divorce cases that have children involved, right? The child tax credit. The child tax credit has been sort of this static number that hasn't been changing. The fact of the matter is, we're all watching inflation. We all see groceries going up at the grocery store, right? That's right. And certainly the costs of raising children up. But here we had this static tax credit that now is actually going to be indexed with inflation, right? And so there's going to be an opportunity to see that child tax credit go up over time. Now, here's the tricky part, though, right, Susan? When we're negotiating divorces, we're all looking at like, well, what's fair, right? Or in some states, what's equal. That child tax credit is not going to be the same every year. So if you're one of those families that are like, well, we're just going to alternate the tax credit, I would argue as a financial professional, it's more fair now because that inflation number is built in. And realistically, we do know that expenses are going up every year. But for somebody who's looking at the actual dollars, especially if there's multiple children involved, right? The feeling around that might not be, this is a fair division because you're getting more if you get it next year, right? But that's a piece of it. That's a piece of what we're looking at. So looking at things with more of a fine-tooth comb, looking at how do we figure out what these deductions are going to be, right? How do we change tax brackets over time to recognize this inflation? So these are some of the things that I think the lawmakers were really trying to do. However, in actuality, right, how things are actually going to be executed upon, there's a lot of challenges around that, right? Anytime we see a bill like this come out, everybody's got to change, right? The financial institutions got to get on board. The IRS has to give us some really clear guidance. All of our software tools that we use have to be updated to reflect all of these different adjustments, right? So there's a lot happening behind the scenes right now with everybody just trying to really truly understand and interpret all of the details around this bill. But there's some really important things as it relates to specifically the tax brackets and the tax deductions that are going to be available to people. And there's going to be a lot of tax planning that we're doing with our clients in 2025 versus 2026. So I think that's an important piece to understand about this bill. Some of you are in the middle of a divorce. You may be filing jointly in 2025, but you might be filing separately. Depends on how things kind of evolve in your case and where you're at the end of the year. But the tax planning recommendations we're making for 2025 are different from 2026 because there are changes that are happening. And some things might be better if you're filing jointly, and some things might be better if you're filing individually. And it's so critical to take the time to understand your unique situation and how these things actually play out in your specific situation, right? So we're looking at how do we keep clients under a certain income, right? If we're looking at, let's say, healthcare subsidies as an example, we're looking at all of these different things and how they play out in your whole life, and then bringing it back to divorce negotiations. Because at the end of the day, if you're in this process right now, the best that you can do is use the information that's available to you to start to look at, okay, what is my current situation? Once we have a full understanding of the current situation, that's when we can start to play out these scenarios that look at, okay, what if we're in a very different tax situation? Some of these changes have, quote, been made permanent, as they say.
Right. I think
but when tax changes are permanent, it's just until it's changed again, right? It doesn't actually mean that it's never going to change again.
Nothing's ever forever.
And so you've been doing this long enough to know that there have been many, many changes over the years. There were so many different programs that came out during COVID, right? All of these tax issues really need to be fully understood and how they apply to your unique situation before you can really look at, well, what does this mean in the context of my divorce, specifically my financial situation?
Well, and I think that's a gift right there, what you just said for listeners. So I really want them to hear this, is there has been, with the passage of this new bill, it has so many changes in it, some of which are, and I'm putting it in the air hashtags, right, or in the air quotes of permanent. Others only are in place for a couple of years. Others phase out. Others, the limits have been, everything is changed. This has a huge number of changes within it. And because it just happened, I do think it is shining a light, or I'm hoping that it is shining a light on the importance of the financial planning as you go through divorce, right? Because a lot of times when we've had some laws in place for a little while, everybody thinks they start to know with some certainty what is going to happen. And people will say, oh, I don't need as much advice. And what I'm hoping everyone is hearing out here, here's the gift, everyone. You need a financial advisor and CDFA to be helping you to understand all of the nuances, because you said something that I think is critically important. These will affect every single couple differently, and they may affect every single couple and family differently every year.
That's right.
Every year. So let's talk. You mentioned one, and I do think it's important for people to understand. I know this has brought out a lot of questions from my listeners from the last episode, and that is the potential cuts to subsidies for plans under the Affordable Care Act, which, for those who don't know, that's Obamacare. And, one of the things we saw after Obamacare happened or came into being law is that COBRA, which many people may be hearing as they're going through divorce, which is one way for a spouse who is getting divorced, who will no longer be covered under an employed spouse's policy, they were able to get coverage through COBRA, but it's very expensive through COBRA most of the time. And so through Obamacare, people were able to get really good health care that was well priced, or at least get well priced. It wasn't always really good. But with the subsidies going away, the prices for these Obamacare policies are going to go back up. This is going to be significant for a lot of spouses who rely on the health insurance that they get through their spouse's health insurance that's not going to be available to them anymore. How does that factor in when you're talking about spousal support, and when you're talking about child support, and when you're talking about the distribution of assets, et cetera?
Yeah, so this is an issue regardless of what is going on with government and funding and all of that people, for whatever reason, often just ignore. And it is a huge expense if you have to get it on your own, right? If you have to get insurance on your own, it's a huge expense. Especially, even if you're low income, right? The Medicaid cuts under this bill were huge. And I don't know that we are going to know the full impact of those cuts for a while now, but the funding is significant, right? The reduction in funding is huge. When it comes to, having a subsidy in place, that you're right. I mean, that has made it more affordable for some people. But the other issue is just being able to get health insurance, right? I mean,
Right.
that's a critical piece of this. So what I always encourage people to do, and this is regardless of what's happening in the government, is to have a conversation with a health insurance broker at some point during the divorce process. Don't wait till you're done going through the divorce, even maybe when you're thinking about it, honestly. It is such a big expense. I mean, this is, for some people, just to be clear on what we're talking about, this is a mortgage payment.
Yes.
I mean, their health insurance for some people could be a mortgage. So we're talking about a very large expense for some families. To make sure that you know what that is so you can plan for it. I think, at this point in where we are economically, we need to plan to take care of ourselves, to be self-sufficient as possible, right? I mean, yeah, it's great to think that we can rely on this insurance or we can rely on that insurance. But the fact of the matter is, one of the things that financial planners are really, really focused on is risk, right? Where is the risk? Sometimes, especially when we're leaning on like these subsidies or something, that's a huge risk that's going away. And so acknowledging, I mean, that's something that we're trying to talk to clients about all the time. And to your point, Susan, I think that's something that when you're not working with a financial professional through this process can often get missed. But especially if there is a spouse that doesn't have health insurance available through their employer, we have to have at least some idea of what we're talking about in terms of cost to know, what do I need from a spousal support perspective, right? Like, am I actually going to be able to afford to stay in this house? That may seem like a strange thing to talk about in the context of health insurance, but it's not, because it's such a large expense that people are talking about. But then we're also looking at, so many people, Susan and I talk to, are like, well, I just can't afford health insurance at this point.
So I'm not going to get it.
So we talk a lot about the risk of not having it. What does that look like? If something happens, like, catastrophic things happen all the time. And as financial planners, we see that all the time, right? And so it's really, really critical that people understand, what are my options? What options are available to me now? What do I have to choose from? And acknowledging, just like if you had your employer's plan, every year your employer is evaluating the benefits that they're providing to their employees. Expect your options to change. Expect them to change and be prepared for it. And the only way you can truly prepare yourself is to make sure that you have that financial stability, which means liquid cash reserves.
Right. So it may change the entire tenor of your divorce negotiation. And what you don't want to do is negotiate your divorce and then find out about the health insurance costs and then have negotiated from the wrong perspective. And I just want to give a little, you called it a mortgage payment, which I think is a really good measure for people. But I remember cases, and I haven't negotiated where this issue was there for probably like 8 years or so. But I remember, people looking at the COBRA cost, and I will say this is usually women, right? And health insurance, ladies, I hate to tell you this, but health insurance for us is more expensive than health insurance for men. It's just fact of life. We pay more for health insurance than men pay for health insurance. But I can remember clients who checked for COBRA and it was going to cost them, in some cases, up to $1,500 to $2,000 a month for the health insurance coverage through COBRA. And that's only good for 36 months. Then they were out there in the wild, wild west. Once Obamacare came out, the Affordable Care Act, they were able to get comparable coverage in the hundreds of dollars, $600 a month, $500 a month, but definitely under $1,000 almost everyone. You could get $200. It was very minimal coverage, but at least you got catastrophic care for those cases you were talking about. So think about that difference, because the reason that people could get those less expensive policies was because there were subsidies available. The government was subsidizing that so that people could get health insurance. That is going away in large part over time through some of the provisions of this One Big Beautiful Bill Act.
Just one more thing I wanted to say, Susan, on the health insurance, and that's specifically for those who are doing Medicare. So if you're 65 and older, yes, there has been some pretty significant changes that can potentially reduce the income that's being looked at for IRMA surcharges. And so for some seniors, we will actually see healthcare costs come down. So I just want to make sure that that's
That's a really good point. And there will be, that's another point that I think is a really good point to why they need to talk to someone like you, right? So that they understand the nuance in their own particular case. I see healthcare is really one of the biggest issues, at least right now, that we can foresee going in and really extending out over a period of time. So we're taping this episode in 2025. I think healthcare is going to be a major issue in 2026 when you're getting divorced, 2027, 2028, and on beyond that, although who knows, right? But at least for the next 3 years, I think 3.5 years, it's going to be a big issue. All right. So though that's good and bad, but definitely something to be aware of. Let's talk about something that a lot of people have a very positive feeling about. And I want to know just your thoughts on it as a financial professional, but it will also be something that families who have children in the current year or going forward will have to take into consideration when they negotiate their divorce. And that is these Trump accounts for kids. Can you explain what those are, and to the best of your ability under the bill that exists, right? And what that looks like for families going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a lot of details that need to be fleshed out around this specific issue. And these actually start for children born in 2025. $1,000 federal deposit will be made for newborns. I don't know the specific date within 2025. I don't know if it starts January 1st or if it's later in the year. As a financial professional, I don't know how to open a Trump account yet, right? So I think there's a lot that has to be done before these can actually get started. They're an interesting concept. They're kind of something in between like a 529 and a Roth IRA, but essentially, parents can put, I want to say it's like $5,000 a year into their kids' account. The Trump accounts are for kids. And then they have specific ways they're allowed to use them without having any tax implications associated, right? So like a 529 account, we typically think of as a college savings account. These funds can be used for education. Sometimes people actually use their Roth to save for the down payment on their home. These can be used for a first home purchase. So like I said, a lot of the details are still getting fleshed out. I mean, if you have a child being born, who doesn't want to miss out on that $1,000 that they're going to get for that child? What happens if that money gets taken out before a certain, and there's a lot of details that need to really be fleshed out around this, but it's a different kind of account. It's an account for kids. All the newborns will get $1,000 toward that account. And then there are limitations around how much you can put in. The money is, of course, growing tax-free, which is why there are all these limitations around, how much you can put in and how much you can take out for what reasons. But that's kind of some of the basics.
They sound like a positive, and they are. They're $1,000 to the good for each child. But there are caveats to the use, and I do believe that the government selects the bank that they are deposited into, and you need to.
I've heard different things on that, Susan. So I think that's yet to be determined.
Okay, and I think you have to have a social security number for the child, but who will be the custodian? Will parents be joint custodians of those funds? What happens when the parents divorce? Do they remain joint custodians? Do they both have to agree when money comes out? Do they both have to contribute? These are things that we deal with in divorce when it comes to things like 529s or other custodial accounts for kids. This is another custodial account for kids that's going to have to be included in that conversation when you're going through a divorce. One of the things I think is important is what you've said here is we don't really know yet what these are, what they look like, what all the terms are. So again, you're negotiating about an account that you really don't know all the parameters of. That's a lot of what getting divorced in this current economic climate and as we go forward looks like. In fact, you mentioned to me today that we've had a significant shift or some new numbers came out, right? And the stock market's taking another dive. Well, we've heard that a lot lately. Explain to everyone, that volatility that we're dealing with.
The day that we're recording this, the jobs report came out, and there were some huge downward revisions made for the jobs added in May and June. And when I'm talking huge, I'm talking a difference of hundreds of thousands in this specific case. And so when you see a headline like that come out, even here, in August, where a lot of people are on vacation, quite frankly. But when you see a headline like that come out, it creates a lot of mistrust, right? Like people don't know any of the numbers that are coming out. Can we have confidence in those numbers when the revisions are that extreme, right? The Federal Reserve just met, didn't make any changes. Had this revision been made prior, would that have changed the outcome of that meeting? I have no idea. But it's important that just like in divorce negotiations, we have all the information that's available to us when we're making this decision. And so I think it is really challenging to understand the dynamics in the market right now. I always tell investors what drives the market in the short term is headlines. There's a tremendous amount of headline risk. We are in a world right now where anybody can create a headline essentially, right? Various things go viral. We don't have a lot of control over what people are consuming on social media. All of those things can have short-term impacts on the market. Long-term, what grows value in companies is the ability for them to grow profits for their shareholders. And so if we see that companies are still able to grow their profits over time, still able to innovate, still able to grow revenue, get into new markets, create new products, whatever that looks like, then as investors, I think long-term, we can feel confident that that's still a great way to build wealth. Now, with that being said, there are a lot of people, especially when you're going through a divorce, that maybe have not dealt with the investments in the past. Maybe they didn't watch in March of 2020 when the market was down like 30% that month, right? But then popped up to new highs within that year. That's not a long time ago, right? That was just 5 years ago that we saw that happening. I still remember being involved in the market in 2008. And so when you're going through a divorce, there's so much uncertainty. And here you are looking at your statements changing values from month to month or even day to day. That can feel really, really scary. And so really scary. And it can make one of the spouses say, I'm not interested in that. I don't want that, right? I feel more comfortable in like a house that I can touch and furniture that I can touch versus these investments that I don't necessarily fully understand, don't understand how they're valued. And I've never been the one to make decisions around that. And I really caution people to really understand what that can mean long term, right? So often when people are negotiating a divorce, they're focused on their current discomfort, right? Like what feels uncomfortable to me in this moment and how can I solve for that? But as financial planners, we're looking at, okay, yes, we want you to feel okay in this moment, but we also want to make sure you're set up for long-term success. And having this lack of understanding around that market volatility, making somebody kind of steer clear of those assets can really be detrimental long-term. And so it's really important that people understand the risk and reward associated with all of the various pieces of their marital estate. And again, not just balancing that possible reward, but balancing the risk too, and helping people to understand what does that actually look like in terms of negotiating assets.
We'll be right back with more from Leah Hadley, but first, a quick break for a word from one of our sponsors. But hey, if you're over 50 and facing divorce, Leah has a free webinar coming up that you'll definitely want to hear about, so stick around. I'll tell you how to sign up at the end of the episode. Now, here's a message from our sponsor. Let's take a little minute to talk about something special. If you follow me on Instagram, you all know how much I love my Evil Eye pendant. I love I have my bracelet. I have the pendant that goes around my neck. I wear Evil Eyes all the time. And so many of you have reached out asking where I got them. I'm thrilled to share with you all, drum roll please, that my favorite jewelry source, Yumi You Jewelry, is now a sponsor of Divorce and Beyond. For me, Yumi You Jewelry is more than just jewelry. The symbols are symbols of strength, individuality, and empowerment. And they handcraft each piece with love and care. And so they are designed to help women stand out and embrace our unique personalities. So whether it's an evil eye like I have chosen for protection, a hamsa for faith, or any other meaningful symbol, their pieces offer beauty and inspiration even during these tough times like divorce. So here's the best part. Yumi You is giving my listeners an exclusive discount if you use the code BEYOND, that's BEYOND, all caps, at checkout, you'll get 20% off your order. 20%. So if you're looking for a meaningful piece to keep you inspired or to protect you during this difficult time, visit divorcebeyond.com/YumiU. That's YUMIYU. There will be a link in the show notes. And treat yourself or treat someone you love to something special. You deserve it. Now, let's get back to the second half of the show. We have a double whammy going on for those who are getting divorced right now, because divorce brings about instability in your life and uncertainty and the unknown and all that fear. And we're living in economic times that are volatile and up and down and nothing's going on. One other, and you mentioned for many people, they're like, I'd rather have the house with its, solid walls and all that. But you mentioned also the Fed, and the Fed hasn't dropped mortgage or interest rates again. Our mortgage rates are, is not historically high, but they're quite high and have not come down significantly in quite a great deal of time. So for people who want to keep their home, there's no end in sight right now to the high interest rates, which is really complicating refinances, purchases of new homes at the time of divorce. And are we seeing anything in the future that leads us to believe that might change anytime soon?
I don't have a crystal ball. I would love it if I did. But I would say there's nothing that I am seeing personally that would lead me to believe that there's going to be a dramatic change. I don't think there's going to be a dramatic change. I think one of the challenges, Susan, is, when people buy a house together, they often buy a house they can't afford together. The reality is, like, a lot of times people will save for their down payment or not even necessarily have enough for a down payment, and maybe they are, paying more in mortgage interest or insurance. But if you're already buying a house that you can't afford, between the two of you, when you're then trying to fund two households on that same income, and you couldn't afford you were already house poor, there's no situation in which one of you can afford that house if you couldn't afford it jointly and there's no change in income, right? Sometimes we just have to be very, and I know they're hard conversations, but we have to be very realistic that sometimes you have to sell that house. And I think we are in a world right now where more often than not, we're looking at situations where a house has to be sold. And nobody's ever had, everybody always wants to argue over the house and fight over the house. But
we've got whole episodes on that, both of us, right?
Realistically, right now, what we're looking at is homes that have increased dramatically in value, right? So even if you could have afforded it when you bought it, right, maybe this wouldn't have been a home that you could afford now, right? Like if you were going out and buying a house, you might not be buying this particular house right now. Well, that's essentially what you're doing if you're buying your partner out or you're refinancing in order to get them off the mortgage or whatever. You are making a choice to have this financial transaction right now. Is it a house that you can afford on your own right now with the values having gone up, potentially a higher interest rate? Looking at all of these different factors, I see a lot of creative settlements around, co-owning the home together for a period of time, especially when there's children involved and things like that. Then we see post-divorce, all kinds of issues come up with some of these agreements. So, I get a ton of pushback from people when I'm talking about, you got to consider selling the house. A lot of people have it ingrained in their mind that if they're renting, they're throwing money away, but you're much better off renting something that you can afford, maybe having that lump sum of cash that you got from that house, compounding interest, right? Earning money for you, than trying to stay in a home that you can't afford. And things that I've seen that are just so heartbreaking, people having their homes flooded and not having the money to deal with it, mold, like dealing with some pretty serious issues here. But because they did everything they could to keep that house, and then there's nothing extra to actually take care of it. And big things come up all the time. And so, yeah, I get a lot of pushback from people, but a lot of times, we are looking at maybe you just can't afford to keep that home as part of the settlement.
You and I both know that is one of the most difficult conversations. I've had many, many cases that have been driven to the courtroom door for trial because somebody just didn't want to accept that the house wasn't really a feasible option for them. And you and I am sure have both seen how many cases where somebody does keep the house because they have a very good financial person who's able to come up with a budget that lets them, take every penny that they're getting in support and take this, but maximize it, but it's going to cover the cost of the house. But then something catastrophic happens, like you're talking about, or just then one day support stops because we know support doesn't go forever. They've now spent every penny they got to try and keep that house going. And those people right now, as they sit in this world with rising interest rates, et cetera, are really finding themselves in trouble because they are in that situation where if you sell, yes, you can sell and hopefully find money, but the housing market is tough right now.
Well, and I will say the last several years, the benefit of the quick turnover in inventory, right, is at least if you had to sell, you knew it would sell. And not only would it would sell in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, it's been crazy.
But we are definitely seeing now clients who are putting their home on the market in some areas, that we work with people all over the country. So in some areas of the country, we are seeing prices come down substantially. I have one client who's had a home on the market that she thought it would sell very quickly. I think it's been 9 months now, Susan. This is like a beautiful home. It was built within the last 5 years. I mean, this is not like something that's like a fixer-upper that, you know what I mean, that sometimes might take a while. So we're seeing a different market. And so that the stress of that, if you're going through a divorce for the first time, it's not something that you've experienced, but it adds a tremendous amount of stress to the parties who are trying to sell the house and then finding that like, all right, are we going to have to lower the price? You have to come to agreements on these things, right? It can be really challenging.
Yeah, well, and you say that word stress, and I want to talk about that because we just talked about the double whammy. Getting divorced is stressful, and the economic times are stressful because of the uncertainty. Put those two things together, and we both know that when people are going through divorce and they're stressed, it raises the conflict, right? So with this double whammy that we have right now of stress coming from so many different directions and the uncertainties that you're talking about, I mean, a lot of these questions can't be answered with finality, right? They don't know. And so that's where having an expert, a financial expert who can do modeling, who can work on risk and looking to minimize or mitigate risk, right? Those are big words when it comes to dealing with finances. You may not be able to eliminate all risk, but you can know what the risks are and you can make choices that mitigate it or minimize it. And so I wanted you to talk a little bit about how important modeling is right now while we're in this. I mean, it's always important. It's a huge part of what y'all do, but it's really important right now.
It is. It's so important. And I will say the number one question that I get from people, won't surprise you, is can I afford to stay in the house? Number one question that I get. Now, I have clients right now who have multiple homes. That comes up a lot too. Still doesn't mean that they can afford to stay in one of those homes. I can't answer that for them. If I'm just having a conversation, like you and I are just having a conversation, a lot of times people want to give me kind of the facts of their case and have me answer a question. But this modeling is so powerful because we're looking at, all right, what are the tax implications of this decision? What does this mean today? What does this mean 10 years from now? I just had a client, we were just going through a modeling scenario. She can absolutely afford, they have multiple homes. She can afford to stay in the home that she's in right now, but she wants to do tons of traveling and she wants, you know what I mean? So like, she's more interested in her lifestyle. She's having grandchildren right now, and she wants to make sure that she can feel comfortable knowing that she's got the cash flow to support the lifestyle she wants, less about the real estate. Now, maybe she could have afforded to do both, but when we did the scenario analysis, we found that she was going to have a lot more comfort and flexibility if she downsized and then had, the extra cash flow to spend the way that she wanted to spend. It's always different. The things that we're looking at for people are always going to be different. But this is a world in which we often have to look at, and now sometimes people are a little ridiculous, but the reality is a lot of people are worried about their jobs. A lot of people are worried about their jobs, right? Now, sometimes people don't really have a basis for that anxiety or concern, right? But sometimes people really do. And especially, and I know it comes up a lot where the other party might be pushing back, but as people age, ageism is real. right? And if you lose your job, it can be very difficult, depending on your age, to find another job. Like, that's the reality of the situation. And so part of what we're looking at, and I tell people, whether I'm doing this for people who are going through a divorce or not going through a divorce, we don't always get to choose when we retire. Sometimes our bodies choose for us. Sometimes our minds choose for us. Sometimes our employer, sometimes a loved one who we have to care for, right? There's a lot of different reasons why income may be reduced or stopped for a lot of different reasons, right? And so we want to look at that scenario. What is that actually going to mean for you? And how can you prepare if that does happen, right? And that's going to be in the context of a conversation about individual planning, but it's also about, like, what if your spouse can't pay spousal support anymore or can't pay child support? What is that going to look like? How are you going to be self-sufficient enough to know that your entire well-being is not dependent on this other individual who you're divorced from now, right? It's a very, very difficult thing, but the scenarios give us clarity. I mean, they give us the information that we need to make good decisions. I don't make decisions for people. I show people the financials, right? I show them, if this is what you decide to do, this is what it's going to mean from you from a cash flow perspective. This is how your net worth is going to grow over time. Looking at these projections so people can really understand, when we're looking at these projections, just to put some real numbers around it, if I'm talking to a client about downsizing, maybe they're in $1 million home and we're talking about downsizing to 500,000. Well, that could be the difference of having $1 million available at retirement and $2.5 million available at retirement. We look at the costs that are going into that home versus saving and investment for your retirement. So we're looking at all of those different things to help people truly understand, what is the magnitude of this decision? How is it going to impact you? And it's your life. I want you to make decisions, but I want you to make well-informed decisions.
That's where the power is. Because as lawyers, we get this as well. We get people who are going through such a difficult time. We're the expert. I'm the expert in the law. You're the expert on the finance. They want to turn to someone and have someone else make decisions for them, right? Because it's hard. It's hard making these decisions. You're the expert. I'm paying you for it. You tell me what to do. And we can give you advice, and we can tell you, as you're saying, you can do the models, you can tell them the risk potential, all of these things. But that is a sentence I've said to so many clients. But ultimately, it is your life.
That's
and
right.
I'll go home and live my life at the end of this day. You're going to go forward and live this. And I think that's an important part in what we're talking about in working with a financial professional, and why probably more than any other time right now is when I hope people understand just how important this role is. Because when you have this level of uncertainty, yet you are forced as a part of the divorce process to make choices, make sure you're making those choices with as much information as you can have.
Absolutely. And I think the process itself can be incredibly disempowering. Like, just the structure of the way the process is set up for most people. It doesn't have to be that way. It can be an empowering educational process, right? It can be a time where you give yourself the space to work through, process the emotion, get a clear mind, and really look at, okay, how can I make decisions that are in my best interest? Maybe I haven't been a part of those decisions in the past. This can be an exciting time to really allow these professionals to lift you up, to provide you the support that you need to feel educated and feel empowered to make these decisions. It doesn't have to be such a negative process. It really can be an empowering process if you're surrounded by the right folks and you allow it to be.
Yeah, this is why I talk about the power of your team, right? And you and I bet both seen it. I know I have seen it when I've been working in collaborative models with financial professional and a divorce coach. That has been a part of like the way I prefer to do a divorce and then mediation for years. And I have seen people who have come into the divorce process who are feeling extremely disempowered or extremely, fearful and all of that. And when they are given the knowledge and the education so that they can make informed choices, and I'm not saying it's not hard, but to see someone gain their power from that and go forth into what I like to call the beyond, right? Into their lives beyond. It's actually a beautiful process to watch and to feel that you're some part of, right? I know that's a big part of what you do and why you do what you do.
You're exactly right, Susan. Like the divorce work can be grueling. It can be difficult. There are always challenging cases that come up. I always remind our team that people aren't at their best when they're going through divorce. And so sometimes even our interactions can be challenged, right? For a variety of different reasons. But it is so personally rewarding for that moment that you're talking about, to see somebody take control, even things like, going with somebody to open their first bank account that they've had as an adult. And sometimes we're doing that with somebody who's 60 plus years old. But the reality is they went from high school to maybe marriage or college and then marriage, and spouse took care of everything for all these years. And now we need to deal with these things. But knowing that you can, right? Knowing that you know how to open a credit card in your own name, right? These are all steps that it's like, wait a minute, I can do this. Every little win builds that confidence. And I just love celebrating with our clients as we see them pull through those steps, because it really is so valuable. And that will impact them for the rest of their lives in such a positive, meaningful way.
It's a game changer, not just for the divorce process, but for that life beyond. And one of the things I want to make sure my listeners know about, because you mentioned retirement and you mentioned some older clients. We do in the United States anyway. We have seen a huge surge in gray divorce, if you want to call it silver divorce after 50, whatever that is, because there are even more financial impacts when you are getting divorced closer to what we might call retirement age. There's a lot more that has to go into the financial modeling, the thoughts that you're going to make, the choices that you'll make. And you're going to be having a free workshop that you're doing for those who are going through divorce after 50. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know that's one of your particular areas of expertise.
Thank you. Yes, it's called Divorce After 50, Protecting Your Retirement and Securing Your Future. The challenge here for those who are divorcing later in life, there's just not as much time to potentially make up for maybe any mistakes that you may have made, right? So the mistakes that people make when they are divorcing later in life can really cost them in ways that they may not understand and realize, that just don't impact younger folks in the same way. Because like I said, you can make changes in your lifestyle. You just have a lot of time before retirement. When you're after 50, sometimes people have already slowed down quite a bit. We work with a lot of people who have become disabled in some way over the years, and maybe 50, they're already not working. But certainly as people approach 60 plus, we look at people, starting to think about retirement. Well, here's the thing. If you've been planning all these years to retire with your spouse and to fund one household for that retirement, or maybe one household in like a summer vacation home or what have you. And now we're looking at actually divorcing and retiring separately, funding two entire households and lifestyles, right? Potentially with no additional income coming in, right? I mean, we work with plenty of folks who are divorcing and they're already retired, or one of them is retired. And this particular demographic has to get the finances right as part of this divorce negotiation process. They just have to. It's so, so critical for their long-term well-being. And so that's what this particular workshop is all about, is really making sure you understand what are the things that need to get negotiated. Where do we see the biggest mistakes? We see mistakes all the time. Unfortunately, sometimes people come to us post-divorce and there's not as much that we can do about it. But, when they come before the divorce is final, we can look and make some adjustments. But regardless, knowing where those possible mistakes, costly mistakes can be and how to avoid them, I think is so imperative for this demographic in particular. And so that's really what this workshop is all about.
Well, and I want to emphasize, this is a free workshop that we're giving. It's on August 26th at 1 p.m. ET, and we're going to have a link where you can sign up in the show notes, as always, guys. So it'll be in the show notes for you. But if you are facing divorce after 50, or anyone that you know, just make sure you share this with them, because this is, I think you can see throughout this episode, which has been so jam-packed with information. I bet your heads are spinning. The good thing about podcasts, right, guys? You can listen to them time and time again. Same thing with the workshop. Be sure to tell everyone that they can sign up for the workshop. And another resource that I do want to make sure that everyone knows about, I mentioned it in the intro, but Leah has her own podcast. It's called Intentional Divorce Insights. And I am super excited because for the very first time, and Divorce and Beyond has been out here for more than 5 years. And for the very first time, we are going to feature another podcast on our feed. So all of you can tune in on Thursday, right after this episode premieres, and you're going to hear the premiere, the fourth season premiere of Leah's podcast is going to air on Divorce and Beyond's feed. So do not miss it. I want to say I've listened to it. I was lucky to have a little preview, and I won't give it away, but it is a very informative, full of golden nuggets for you all. But it's also a very personal and a lovely episode. And I just want to say I'm honored that you're airing it on our feed. I'm so excited to be doing this with you, because the information that you bring to people, the role that you can play in this divorce, and in so many ways is so much more transformational than what I've been able to do in my years and career as a divorce attorney. I help people with the law for a short period of time in their lives. I'm thrilled that divorce is a finite, short period, relatively short period of time, I hope, in your life journey. But financial clarity and understanding and planning, that is a lifetime of support. So, your podcast, your help, this episode, so wonderful. So thank you. How would my listeners reach out to you to get in touch with you, to hear more about you? What are the best ways to reach out?
So I am active on Instagram as Watch Her Thrive. And we have a free Facebook group called Watch Her Thrive as well, where lots of good financial information, great place to ask financial questions. And I'm also very active on LinkedIn, Leah Hadley on LinkedIn.
Yeah. And I'll have links to the website as well. Always, everything will be in the show notes for all of you. Definitely go and sign up for the free webinar and tune in on Thursday for the premiere of season 4 of Intentional Divorce Insights. It's going to be a great episode to carry on from where we are going here. Leah, thank you so much. And I really appreciate your honing in on these issues that are so central to what people are going through right now and as they go forward, and what my listeners have been asking for. That's just, I may have to call on you because I have a feeling we're going to have a lot more instability and questions ahead. Maybe we'll do another wrap up in 2026 as we see some of this starting to play out. Thank you so much.
It has truly been my pleasure, Susan. Thank you so much for having me and for featuring the Intentional Divorce Insights podcast. I am just thrilled to be a part of your platform and so grateful.
Well, and I can't wait for Thursday and for everyone who hasn't yet had the opportunity to meet you and hear more from you on the feed. So thank you so much. Okay, great episode. So much to unpack there. So before we go, let's round up today's golden nuggets. First, divorce is a financial negotiation, especially right now, with the economic shifts happening daily from healthcare subsidies to housing costs. Your divorce strategy must reflect today's realities, not last year's assumptions. Number 2, flexibility is your best protection. Static settlements won't hold up in a volatile economy. Building adaptable agreements and modeling different scenarios with a CDFA gives you clarity and confidence. Nugget number 3, preparation is power. Do not wait to understand the impact of health insurance, taxes, or asset division until it's too late. The sooner you plan, the more options you have. And 4, stress drives conflict. Financial fear is often the hidden spark behind high conflict cases. The antidote? Solid, informed decision-making guided by professionals like Leah. If you want to keep learning from Leah, be sure to tune in this Thursday right here on Divorce and Beyond. We're airing the premiere episode of season 4 of her podcast, Intentional Divorce Insights. And I promise you, it's a powerful one. And don't forget, Leah's free live webinar is coming up soon for those facing divorce after 50. I'll tell you how to sign up in the show notes. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you soon here on Divorce and Beyond. Thank you for joining me today on the Divorce and Beyond podcast. I hope you found some information and inspiration to help you on this journey. Please join me every Monday at 6 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for a new episode. And if you like the show, please take the time to subscribe and leave me a 5-star review on iTunes. You can also find more information on the website at divorceandbeyondpod.com, where you'll find links to the YouTube channel, transcripts of the episodes, and other bonus content. So I'll see you next week to help you move through your divorce and beyond.